The foundation of all habit formation lies in the remarkable ability of the human brain to rewire itself. This process is called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is not just a concept for scientists, it's the biological engine that makes personal transformation possible. Whether you're trying to build a morning routine, eliminate distractions, or adopt a new lifestyle, the first step is understanding that your brain is designed to change. The circuitry in your brain is malleable. It is shaped by experience, molded by repetition, and reinforced through focused attention. At the core of neuroplasticity is a simple principle: neurons that fire together, wire together. This means that when you perform an action repeatedly, the neurons involved in that behavior begin to create stronger connections with each other. Over time, this forms a more efficient pathway, allowing the behavior to be executed with less effort. In the early stages, the effort feels high because the pathway is new, raw, uninsulated, unrefined. But with consistent action and repetition, that same path becomes smoother. The brain conserves energy by favoring well-traveled routes. This is how a conscious effort slowly becomes an automatic behavior, a habit. In the initial stages of forming a habit, the brain operates in a highly active plastic state. This period, often referred to as the cognitive phase, requires deliberate focus. When you first start a new habit, whether it's journaling, exercising, meditating, or even drinking more water, you are actively directing your attention and effort toward that task. You may feel resistance. You may notice how unnatural it feels. That discomfort is not failure. It's the signal that neuroplasticity is in motion. The more you embrace that tension, the more your brain rewires itself to adapt. Now, this doesn't happen randomly or without structure. Neuroplasticity is experience dependent. This means that the brain doesn't change just because time passes. It changes in response to what you do with your time. If you wake up each day and repeat a behavior, you're signaling to your brain that this action matters. The brain begins to prioritize those pathways, assigning more neurological resources to them and reinforcing the behavior. But if you only do it once a week or whenever it's convenient, the signal is too weak to matter. Consistency is not just motivational advice, it's a biological requirement. There is also a time component to this process. The initial stage of forming a habit is metabolically expensive for the brain. It requires focus, emotional investment, and often generates fatigue. That's because you're engaging regions of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, planning, and self-control. As the behavior becomes more automatic, control gradually shifts to the basal ganglia, a part of the brain responsible for routine behaviors. This shift marks the transition from effortful learning to automatic execution. Once the habit resides in the basal ganglia, it no longer drains as much energy from your cognitive systems. This is how behavior becomes effortless over time, not because it's easier, but because your brain has optimized the process. Another crucial factor in this process is attention. Attention acts like a spotlight for neuroplasticity. Whatever you focus on gets reinforced. If you're distracted, multitasking, or emotionally disengaged while trying to form a new habit, the neural pathways won't form with the same strength. You must direct your full attention to the behavior if you want it to take root in your nervous system. Focus is the signal that tells your brain, this matters, build here. In practical terms, this means creating an environment that reduces distraction and supports your intention. Turning off notifications, blocking time, and designing friction-free access to your new habit. These are not just productivity hacks. They're tools for guiding your brain's plasticity in the direction you want it to go. The brain is always adapting. It's either adapting to your intention or to your inaction. You are either training your brain to serve your goals or allowing it to default to comfort, distraction, and entropy. At the heart of human behavior is a molecule, dopamine, that drives action, motivation, and ultimately the formation of habits. Dopamine is often misunderstood as a pleasure chemical, but it's more accurately described as the molecule of motivation and pursuit. It doesn't just reward you after success, it pushes you to act in anticipation of a future reward. This distinction is crucial when it comes to building strong habits because the behaviors that get reinforced are not simply those that feel good, but those that stimulate dopamine release in the brain consistently and meaningfully. When you're trying to establish a new habit, your nervous system is monitoring the outcomes and determining whether that behavior is worth repeating. Dopamine acts as a feedback signal. It tells the brain, that was good, do it again. The release of dopamine strengthens the association between the behavior and the perceived reward. This creates what neuroscientists refer to as reinforcement learning, the neural mechanism that wires behaviors into the brain based on the outcomes they produce. Strong habits are born when the brain associates consistent action with meaningful reward. But here's where it gets interesting. Dopamine levels can be influenced voluntarily. You can learn to associate positive meaning with effort itself, not just with outcomes. Most people only reward themselves once they see external results, like a number on a scale, a completed project, or praise from others. However, the most sustainable habits are built by those who learn to generate dopamine from the process, not the prize. When you say to yourself, this grind is making me stronger, or every rep is building the future me, you're creating an internal loop of motivation. The brain hears that message and releases dopamine accordingly. That chemical surge strengthens the behavior and makes you more likely to repeat it, even in the absence of visible results. Dopamine also plays a central role in goal-directed behavior. The human brain is designed to predict and chase rewards. When you have a clear vision of what you want, the dopamine system becomes active in anticipation. That's why visualization, journaling goals, or tracking your progress can be such powerful tools. They keep the reward pathway active even before the habit becomes automatic. But if your goals are vague or emotionally disconnected, dopamine levels stay flat and the drive to repeat behaviors diminishes. There's also a timing factor. The highest dopamine spikes often occur just before completing a behavior, not after. This is why it's vital to celebrate effort in real time. If you're running and you're on your final stretch, telling yourself this is the part that matters can create a neurochemical burst that reinforces endurance. The same applies to writing one more paragraph, holding a stretch for a few extra seconds, or resisting a distraction just one more time. These small acts of reinforcement feed into a greater circuit of behavioral identity. Over time, your brain no longer sees these as isolated tasks. They become part of who you are. But it's important to understand that the dopamine system is not infinite. If you rely solely on external stimuli, likes, followers, cheat meals, compliments, you risk dopamine depletion or desensitization. This is why many people burn out after an initial surge of motivation. Their reward system was front-loaded with external highs that couldn't be sustained. To build strong habits that endure, you must internalize the reward system. You must train your brain to appreciate the behavior itself, not just what it might bring. This is not about being blindly optimistic or forcing positivity. It's about using your biology to create a loop where effort feels intrinsically valuable. Another powerful method for reinforcing habits using dopamine is self-directed language. Studies have shown that what you say to yourself, internally or out loud, can either trigger or suppress dopamine release. When you frame a habit with words like, I have to do this, or I should do this, you generate friction and resistance. But when you say, I get to do this, or this is helping me evolve, you trigger a small but meaningful dopamine release. That shift in language is subtle but powerful. It influences the brain's chemistry in a way that promotes repetition, which is the core of habit formation. The brain is a prediction machine, constantly scanning for patterns and rewards. By pairing effort with meaning and action with internal reward, you're training your dopamine system to work in your favor. This isn't about tricking the brain. It's about aligning your biology with your goals so that the process itself becomes the reward. When this shift happens, you stop chasing motivation and start building identity, not just behavior. One of the most effective ways to build a strong habit is to strategically link it to a pre-existing behavior or external cue, a method grounded in the way the brain naturally processes routines and environmental patterns. The brain is highly efficient when it comes to identifying associations. It constantly seeks signals from the environment to predict what happens next. These signals, often called triggers or anchors, are essential for habit formation because they act as the starting pistol for your behavioral sequence. Without a clear trigger, a habit often remains random, inconsistent, and eventually fades away. When you want to build a new habit, it's not enough to rely on motivation or willpower. Those are transient states. What the nervous system really responds to is consistency of input paired with recognizable cues. Your brain becomes far more efficient at deploying behaviors when it knows when and where they're expected to happen. For example, Brushing your teeth in the morning doesn't require effort or motivation, not because the action itself is particularly enjoyable, but because it's anchored to a predictable time and context. You wake up, walk to the bathroom, see your toothbrush, and the behavior fires automatically. That's what a well-wired neural habit loop looks like in action. To create this kind of automaticity in new behaviors, you need to insert the habit into a pre-existing neural pathway, something your brain already recognizes as part of your daily flow. This is the principle behind habit stacking. The idea is simple. Identify a habit you already do with regularity and pair your new habit directly after it. If you already drink coffee every morning, you can anchor 5 minutes of breath work or goal visualization immediately after your final sip. The coffee becomes the neural cue, signaling the brain that a new behavior is about to unfold. Over time, the brain starts linking the two events together in a single behavioral circuit, reducing the resistance and cognitive effort required to perform the new habit. It's also important to keep the trigger clear and specific. Vague cues like do it later or sometime in the evening don't activate the brain's procedural memory system in the same way. The basal ganglia, the region involved in automating routines, thrives on specificity and structure. A cue like after I close my laptop at 6 p.m., I'll go for a 15-minute walk is far more effective than a general intention like I should walk more in the evenings. In this way, behavioral neuroscience emphasizes the role of temporal and spatial anchoring, assigning a time and a place to the new habit so that the brain can begin to predict and prepare for it in advance. In addition to time-based triggers, location-based cues are highly effective. If your environment is designed to prompt the desired action, habit formation accelerates. For instance, placing a journal on your pillow in the morning increases the likelihood that you'll write in it at night. Positioning your workout shoes next to the door reinforces the mental script that your day includes physical movement. The brain begins to assign meaning to the objects and spaces around you. They become neural symbols for the actions they are tied to, and this physical anchoring reduces the cognitive load required to make decisions later. Another often overlooked strategy is emotional anchoring. The brain strongly associates emotions with memories and behaviors. If you consistently practice your habit during a state of elevated emotion, whether it's calmness after meditation, clarity after a cold shower, or determination after a motivating podcast, the brain begins to associate the emotional state with the behavior. This emotional priming not only strengthens the neural pathways, but makes the habit more resilient to internal resistance. The real power of triggers and anchors lies in their ability to reduce activation energy. When a behavior is cued by something familiar, the brain doesn't have to search for a reason to begin. The decision is already made. This is especially important during moments of low motivation or mental fatigue, when willpower is depleted. Anchors carry the weight of the behavior on days when you might otherwise skip it. They serve as a neurological shortcut, a preloaded instruction set that tells the brain, here's what happens next. Over time, this consistent pairing reshapes neural circuits, reinforcing the habit loop and allowing it to run more automatically. The first 90 minutes after waking is one of the most biologically optimized windows of the entire day for cognitive clarity, emotional regulation, and behavioral imprinting. This is not based on opinion, but grounded in the rhythms of your circadian biology, hormonal fluctuations, and the state of your nervous system. When you first wake up, especially if you've slept well and avoided artificial light late at night, your brain enters a state where it is highly receptive to change. This period represents a powerful window for shaping new habits, not because it's convenient, but because your neurobiology is primed to respond. Cortisol, often misunderstood as a stress hormone, peaks naturally in the early morning. It plays a vital role in mobilizing energy and enhancing alertness. In the first hour of wakefulness, cortisol surges are accompanied by heightened levels of norepinephrine and increased neural activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for focus, decision-making, and planning. This means your ability to direct attention, resist distraction, and apply intentional effort is at its daily peak shortly after waking. Any behavior performed during this phase is stamped more deeply into your neural circuitry due to increased neuroplasticity readiness. This period also coincides with a shift in the state of the brain from deep rest to high alertness. Upon waking, your brain moves from dominant delta and theta wave activity associated with deep sleep and early dream states into alpha and low beta wave activity states connected to alert wakefulness and learning. This shift is significant because alpha brainwave activity is associated with increased receptivity to information and emotional imprinting. When you engage in focused habits, such as journaling, meditation, breathwork, or reading high-value material, during this time, your brain is far more likely to internalize and reinforce those behaviors. In behavioral neuroscience, timing matters as much as repetition. The brain is not equally plastic throughout the day. There are biological windows, periods of enhanced capacity to encode new information or establish new behaviors. The early morning, particularly the first 90 minutes after waking, is one of these windows. When you intentionally insert a habit into this time frame, you are essentially embedding it during a phase of heightened neuroreceptivity. This reduces the resistance typically encountered when trying to initiate change during less optimal periods, such as late afternoon or evening, when decision fatigue and environmental distractions are at their peak. Light exposure plays an integral role during this time. When natural sunlight hits your eyes in the morning, it triggers a cascade of hormonal responses through specialized cells in the retina. This signals the brain's master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, to regulate the release of cortisol, dopamine, and serotonin. These chemicals not only set your internal rhythm for the day, but also enhance mood, motivation, and learning capacity. Exposing yourself to natural light within 30 minutes of waking acts as a powerful behavioral primer. Pairing this light exposure with a new habit, whether it's reading, movement, or creative work, creates a biologically anchored habit loop that becomes easier to repeat. Another key element of this window is the relatively low sensory input from your environment. In the early morning, before social media, email, and other distractions flood your mental space, your dopaminergic system is more stable. You haven't yet been exposed to the volatile highs and lows of digital overstimulation, which means the brain's reward system is more sensitive and easier to shape. Introducing a new habit in this dopamine neutral state creates a pure association between the behavior and the internal reward. This allows the act itself to carry meaning, rather than relying on external validation to sustain it. Moreover, when you perform a habit early in the day, you initiate what is called forward loading of identity. The first few actions after waking serve as a cognitive anchor for how you perceive yourself throughout the rest of the day. If your early behavior is intentional, grounded, and aligned with your goals, the brain tends to maintain that trajectory. This self-generated momentum can carry over into your decisions, reactions, and emotional state well into the evening. Early consistency creates a form of psychological inertia, where your actions are less about constant discipline and more about alignment with the identity you initiated upon waking. In the process of building strong habits, friction is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. The discomfort, the internal resistance, the moments when it feels easier to skip or abandon the behavior, these are not signs that something is wrong. They are evidence that something meaningful is being rewired in the brain. From a neuroscience perspective, friction is a signal of neuroplasticity at work. It indicates that the brain is being challenged to move out of its established patterns, to reorganize its circuitry, and to encode new behavioral pathways. If habit formation feels effortless from the beginning, it likely isn't penetrating deeply enough to cause lasting change. The brain, by design, favors energy conservation. Its default mode is efficiency. This means that it will always try to revert to what is familiar, what is automated, and what requires the least cognitive load. When you introduce a new habit, especially one that disrupts comfort or familiarity, you are challenging this built-in mechanism. That challenge creates neural friction, a kind of biological resistance that manifests as procrastination, distraction, mental fatigue, or even emotional discomfort. The presence of that resistance is not a barrier, it's a clue. It means that the nervous system is being engaged to learn and adapt. When friction appears, it activates the anterior cingulate cortex, a region in the brain responsible for conflict monitoring and error detection. This area is especially active during early habit formation because the brain is trying to reconcile new input with old behavioral scripts. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making and impulse control, must work harder to keep the behavior on track. This cognitive workload is why new habits feel draining. They demand more neurological resources. But this drain is temporary. As the new behavior becomes encoded through repetition and reward, the cognitive load shifts to the basal ganglia, the part of the brain that governs automatic actions. The transition from prefrontal-driven action to basal ganglia-driven automation is the biological hallmark of a strong habit. Understanding this shift is key. It reveals that the difficulty is not permanent. It is part of the training phase. Much like building muscle requires microscopic tears in the fibers to stimulate growth, building habits requires microscopic disruption in neural circuits to force adaptation. This is why embracing the effort, not resisting it, is so important. When you feel resistance and still follow through, you are reinforcing not just the behavior, but the identity that goes with it. You are telling the brain, this is who I am, not just what I do. That identity encoding is one of the most powerful forces in long-term habit formation. There is also a deep link between effort and reward in the brain. Studies in behavioral neuroscience show that the harder you work for something, the more rewarding it becomes. This is not a psychological illusion, it's a neurochemical reality. Effort increases the release of dopamine when the task is completed, especially if that effort was sustained in the face of internal resistance. This means the more friction you overcome, the stronger the reward loop becomes. The brain begins to link challenge with growth, discomfort with progress, and struggle with success. Over time, this reframes your relationship with difficulty. Instead of interpreting effort as a reason to quit, the brain starts to register it as a cue to lean in. One practical approach to dealing with friction is to create ritualized friction zones, deliberate windows of time when you expect the behavior to feel hard and choose to do it anyway. This might be the first 10 minutes of a cold morning run, the moment you sit down to write when your mind is racing, or the silence before your first meditation breath. These moments are neurologically dense with learning. They are the exact points where neural rewiring is most active. Choosing to act during these windows enhances the brain's adaptive response and accelerates the habit formation process. The role of friction in habit formation also has a psychological component. The brain is constantly tracking prediction errors, mismatches between what it expects and what actually happens. When you override resistance and take action despite it, the brain registers that as a positive mismatch. This unexpected behavior generates dopaminergic reward, which strengthens future decision-making in similar moments. The loop becomes self-sustaining. Action despite resistance leads to reward. Reward increases the likelihood of future action, and the habit solidifies through repetition under pressure.